What would you do if the orphanage you once escaped called you back to save it, and at the door stood the woman whose life you changed without ever knowing you did? Ethan Callahan built his life on forgetting where he came from, a self-made billionaire, praised for his discipline and success. He hadn't looked back until now. A letter, a name, and a place he tried to erase suddenly demand his presence. The orphanage he once ran from is on the verge of closing, and the only person keeping it alive, Claire Whitmore, the girl who stayed behind, who grew up without wealth or power, but became a rock for dozens of forgotten children. He has the money. She has the heart. And between them lies a past neither of them truly understands. Now imagine it's you. Could you walk back into the place that broke you? Could you face the person who remembers the parts of you, even you buried? This isn't just a story about giving back. It's about coming home to the people and places that made you. If this story stirs something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, take a deep breath. Let's begin. What would you do if the place that once abandoned you was the only place that could save you? Ethan Callahan is a billionaire, powerful, respected, untouchable. But behind every achievement is a silence. He never speaks of an orphanage he never returned to, a childhood he buried beneath fortune and fame. Until one day, he does go back, not to fix the past, but to run from a present that feels more hollow than ever. There, he meets Claire Whitmore, a woman who stayed behind, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she chose to turn her pain into love for children who had no one else. Two people, one with everything but peace, one with nothing but purpose. What happens when the man who thought he had it all comes face to face with the version of himself he tried to forget? And what if deep inside a chapel that once echoed with silence, he finally hears the one voice he's been searching for his whole life, his own? This is a story about home, healing, and the quiet courage it takes to stay. If it moves you, even just a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. The gravel crunched beneath the wheels of the black Lincoln as it slowed to a halt by the old wrought iron gates. Ethan Callahan sat still for a moment, engine idling, staring out the windshield at the stone arch where the name still stood, barely faded, St. Agnes Home for Children. He hadn't been here in over 30 years. A soft wind moved through the trees, tugging gently at the orange leaves. Millbrook had always been the kind of place where autumn came quietly, without drama, like an old friend slipping in through the back door. Ethan watched a single leaf drift down and land on the hood of his car. For a moment, he didn't move. The past has a way of sneaking up on you, especially when you're not looking for it. He reached into the passenger seat and picked up the envelope again. It was wrinkled now, handled too many times in too few hours. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And maybe that's the only reason you're finally coming back. But come back you must. There are some things that success will never give you, only memory. And maybe forgiveness can... Don't wait too long. Sister Margaret. He exhaled sharply, folded the letter, and tucked it into the breast pocket of his coat. The woman who wrote it had passed away 6 weeks ago. The funeral was private, quiet. He hadn't come, but the guilt had lingered like smoke. Now, here he was. A billionaire who had flown halfway across the country just to stand outside an orphanage most of the world had forgotten. He turned off the engine and stepped out. The cold air bit at his cheeks. He hadn't brought gloves. He never thought he'd stay long. The front steps creaked beneath his polished shoes. The old wooden door, painted navy blue, opened with a quiet groan, and the smell hit him: floor wax, tomato soup, and something faintly floral. Lavender, maybe. For a moment, he was 9 again, sitting on the stairwell, knees scraped, trying not to cry, while Sister Margaret bandaged him and told him stories about lions and quiet bravery. "Can I help you?" a voice asked from inside. Ethan turned, startled. A woman stood by the reception desk, clipboard in hand, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She wore jeans and a thick gray sweater with rolled sleeves. No makeup, no pretense. "Are you lost?" she asked again. but softer this time. He hesitated. No, I grew up here. Long time ago. Her expression changed curiosity, replacing caution. Then you're home, she said with a kind smile. Welcome back. She walked around the desk and extended her hand. I'm Claire Whitmore. I run the day program. He took her hand, warm, steady, firm. Ethan. He replied. He didn't add a last name. He didn't need to. Come in, she said, gesturing him down the hallway. We just finished lunch. The kids are in crafts. Unless you'd rather sit in the chapel. It's quieter. Chapel. He hadn't thought about that place in years. The little pews, the cracked stained glass, the creaky floorboard, third from the back. Actually, he said, I wouldn't mind seeing the rec room. Claire led him down a corridor that hadn't changed much. The linoleum had been redone, and the walls had a fresh coat of paint, pale yellow, but the bones were the same. They passed a bulletin board cluttered with finger paintings and schedules. One corner held a photo of Sister Margaret, smiling beneath her veil, holding a birthday cake. Claire noticed his pause. She was one of a kind, she said softly, tough as nails, but she loved this place more than anything. Said she only ever had one regret. Ethan swallowed. What was that? Claire shrugged. That she couldn't convince a certain boy to come back? Ethan didn't answer. They stepped into the rec room. It was quieter than he remembered. Bright, too. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, falling across a carpet filled with building blocks and puzzles. 4 or 5 kids were scattered around, drawing, giggling, humming to themselves. One boy sat in the corner, rocking slightly, hands flapping. Claire followed his gaze. That's Jacob. He doesn't talk much, but he's got a world in his head bigger than ours. Ethan nodded slowly. I was him once. She looked at him for a long moment, but said nothing. Instead, she walked to the bookshelf, pulled out an old worn volume, The Lion and the Lamb, and set it on the table. I think this used to be yours, she said quietly. His fingers brushed the cover, and just like that, something shifted inside him. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered. Funny how memory shrinks places with time, sanding down the corners and softening the details. Ethan walked in silence beside Claire, their steps echoing faintly off the tiled floor. The smell of crayons and old wood filled the air. He hadn't realized how much he missed it until now. They passed by a classroom, with the door slightly ajar. Inside, a little girl was trying to cut paper hearts with oversized safety scissors, tongue sticking out in fierce concentration. She's new, Claire said. Her name's Lily. Came in 2 weeks ago after her mother was arrested. Ethan glanced back. She doesn't talk much either, Claire added, voice gentle. But she draws a lot. Sometimes, that's the only way they know how to speak. Ethan didn't say anything. His throat had tightened without warning. When they reached the old common room, now a modest library, Claire paused. I'll give you some space. No, it's okay, he said, almost too quickly. You don't have to go. She nodded and stepped aside as he walked slowly through the room. The chairs were newer, but the fireplace was the same. Someone had left a mug of cocoa half drunk on the windowsill. The smell of cinnamon lingered in the air. He ran a hand along the edge of the wooden mantel. I used to sit here, he murmured. Every Wednesday night, Sister Margaret would read The Little Prince. I thought it was boring at first. Then I realized it wasn't about the prince at all. It was about the pilot. Claire smiled. It was her favorite. He turned toward her. You knew her well. Claire walked over and sat on the arm of one of the old chairs. She raised me too, not here. I was placed in foster care after my parents died, but she checked on me every month. And when I turned 18, she brought me here as a volunteer. I never left. Ethan studied her more carefully now. Her voice had that quiet strength, like someone who'd learned to live with pain without letting it define her. Why stay? He asked. You could be anywhere, doing anything. Claire looked down, then back up, because somewhere out there is another version of me. Scared, alone, needing someone to believe they matter. Her words hit deeper than she knew. Ethan looked away, but not fast enough. Claire caught the flicker in his eyes. "Did you ever come back?" she asked gently. "Before today," he shook his head. "No. I built a life as far from here as I could, thought it meant I'd made it." "And did it?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He walked to the bookshelf and ran a finger along the spines. Some titles hadn't changed in decades. Others were newer, bright, hopeful. "I have 3 houses," he said finally. "None of them feel like this." Claire didn't press him. She just let the silence speak for itself. Then, a voice called from the hallway. "Miss Claire." A boy with sandy blonde hair and glasses ran in, holding a piece of cardboard covered in glue and feathers. "Look, I made a phoenix." Claire knelt beside him. "That's incredible. Sam, what does it do?" "It rises." Sam beamed. "From the ashes. It never gives up." Ethan watched the exchange with a strange ache building in his chest. He hadn't felt this way in years. Not in boardrooms, not at charity galas, not even on the nights he tried to sleep in silence so thick it hurt. Claire ruffled Sam's hair and sent him back to class, then turned back to Ethan. "Some kids make paper planes. Some make phoenixes. Depends what they've lost, I guess." He smiled faintly. "You're not what I expected." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect? I don't know," Ethan said. "Someone tired, jaded. Bitterness tends to stick around places like this." She laughed softly. "Oh, I get tired, but bitterness." She shook her head. "There's no time for it when a child needs you to notice they made a phoenix." They stood there for a while, saying nothing more. Outside, the wind carried the rustle of leaves. A bell rang from the east wing. "Nap time. I should get going," Ethan said at last. Claire walked him to the front door. Before he stepped out, she handed him a small object. It was a bookmark, laminated. On it was a crayon drawing of a lion and a child. The name written at the bottom in messy block letters, Ethan. "I found it in the archives a few years ago," Claire said. "Didn't know who he was. Until today." Ethan stared at it, emotions rising like a tide he couldn't hold back. "Thank you," he said softly. She opened the door, and a breeze swept past them. As Ethan stepped outside, he glanced back once. Claire stood in the doorway, arms folded loosely, watching him, not with judgment, with understanding. Ethan didn't sleep well that night. He'd checked into the old inn by the lake, the willow lantern, where lace curtains still hung stiffly in the windows, and the floors creaked with every step. The bed was firm. The room smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. But it wasn't the room that kept him awake. It was the bookmark. He'd placed it on the nightstand beside a glass of untouched water, but even in the dim light, the lion's crayon mane and clumsy lettering seemed to glow. Ethan. He didn't remember drawing it. He didn't remember feeling brave enough to draw anything back then. He remembered fear, silence, that ache of being invisible in a world that only saw noise. But maybe, just maybe someone had seen him. The next morning, he returned to St. Agnes unannounced. Claire was in the yard with the kids, raking leaves into giant piles. A few of the children had taken to jumping into them with wild delight, scattering them all over again. Claire didn't stop them. She looked up when she saw him, a flicker of surprise passing through her features before she smiled. "Back already," she called. "I forgot what fresh air felt like." Ethan replied. Claire handed him a rake. "Then, make yourself useful." He hesitated only a moment before taking it. The wood felt rough in his hand, honest somehow. He worked beside her in silence, clearing a long row along the fence. After a while, Claire spoke again. "You always rake in dress shoes." Ethan glanced down. Occupational hazard. She grinned. "Try sneakers next time. You might enjoy yourself." He found himself smiling despite himself. One of the smaller boys, David, maybe 6, ran up with leaves stuffed down his sweater. "Miss Claire, I'm a scarecrow," he shouted, arms stiff, eyes wide. Claire gasped dramatically. "Heavens protect the crops." David cackled with laughter before darting off. Ethan leaned on the rake. "You're good at that." "At what?" "Knowing what they need." Claire paused. "It's not about knowing. It's about listening. Most people don't realize how loud silence can be." The words hung in the crisp autumn air. Ethan looked at her more closely now. You said you were placed in foster care. How long were you there? All of my childhood, she answered. 4 homes, 2 schools a year. But Sister Margaret always checked in. She sent books, letters. Once, a coat. Why you? Claire shrugged. I never asked. Maybe she saw something. Or maybe she remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. Her voice was quiet now, and Ethan noticed her eyes weren't looking at him, but somewhere far away. I used to sit by the chapel window, he said suddenly, waiting for a mother who never came. Claire turned to him gently. Did anyone know you were waiting? Ethan didn't answer. But in that silence, she understood. They finished raking in companionable quiet. Afterward, Claire invited him in for tea. The kitchen was bright, the table old and sturdy, worn at the edges where generations of small hands had gripped its corners. She poured 2 mugs, set out honey and lemon, no cream, no sugar. Ethan studied the walls. Pictures of children hung in mismatched frames, some new, some yellowed with time. One of them caught his eye, a boy, maybe 10, standing beside a younger girl with dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile. That was Claire and Emily, she said, noticing his gaze. You had a sister. Claire nodded. She died when we were 12. Pneumonia. We were in the same home, but they couldn't afford antibiotics in time. Ethan set his mug down gently. I'm sorry. She was braver than me, Claire said softly. I was the one who cried. She was the one who told me it was okay. There was no bitterness in her voice, just memory, the kind that lingers like perfume after someone leaves a room. Did you ever want your own family? Ethan asked before he could stop himself. Claire looked at him, then down. I did. Still do. But I've stopped thinking it has to look a certain way. He nodded slowly, letting the weight of her words settle. Outside, the laughter of children echoed. One of them was singing something off-key. Another called out for someone to push them on the swing. Ethan stood. Would you mind if I stayed a little longer today? Claire smiled. Of course not. There's a bookshelf that needs organizing, and I hear billionaires are great with the Dewey Decimal System. He chuckled. We outsource that. She handed him a list. Not today, you don't. For the rest of the afternoon. Ethan shelved books, untangled yarn, and helped repair a broken toy truck with 2 stubborn screws. It was absurdly mundane. It was absurdly grounding. Later, as the sun dipped low, he walked past the old chapel and peeked inside. Same pews, same dusty light. He sat down, alone. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to be anyone other than the boy who once sat there, waiting. The attic at St. Agnes had always been a mystery. It sat above the east wing, accessible by a narrow staircase behind a nondescript door. As a child, Ethan had only been there once chasing a lost marble with another boy. It had smelled of mothballs and old linen. Dust motes floated like lazy ghosts through the air. Now, decades later, Ethan stood at the bottom of that same staircase, hand resting on the doorknob. Claire had mentioned they stored some of Sister Margaret's old things up here after the funeral. No one had gone through them yet. He took a breath and climbed. The light bulb flickered once before casting a dim, yellow glow across the room. Boxes, crates, and wooden chests lined the walls. Old toys, outdated files, holiday decorations from years past. He began opening boxes, slowly, carefully, one by one. Most were filled with predictable things: Christmas cards, children's drawings, financial records. And then, tucked beneath a stack of hymnals, he found a small metal tin. It was pale blue, with a faded sticker on the lid that read simply, "Letters, Personal." He sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and opened it. Inside were envelopes, neatly stacked, yellowing at the edges. Some were addressed to children long gone. Others had no names, just dates and short labels. April, the boy with the scar. June, the one who stopped speaking. And then, one caught his eye. It was addressed to Ethan Callahan. He froze. The handwriting was unmistakably Sister Margaret's, still strong, even in her later years. He opened the envelope with care, fingers trembling. "Dear Ethan, I know you may never come back, but I've carried something with me for a long time, and I can't leave this world without putting it somewhere it belongs. You may not remember her, most boys. Your age barely noticed, but there was a girl who stayed with us briefly when you were about 12. Her name was Claire Whitmore. She was small, frightened, barely spoke above a whisper. You were the one who found her crying under the kitchen table. You sat with her for over an hour, said nothing, just sat there and passed her pieces of bread from your pocket. That moment saved her. She never forgot it. I made sure she stayed in the system, close to me. She had the heart of someone who had seen pain and chosen compassion anyway. Years later, when she asked to work here, I knew why. She came back looking for the boy who had once saved her. She never found him. Maybe now. She already has. With all my love." Sister Margaret Ethan stared at the page, the attic falling into silence around him. He didn't remember that day. But now suddenly, he did remember hiding under the table himself. The thick legs of the wood, the smell of peanut butter, the weight of silence between two kids who didn't know how to speak, but knew how to sit still together. Claire. A strange rush of warmth and regret coursed through him. Had he really been the beginning of her path? And all these years, he'd had no idea. He looked down at the rest of the letters, dozens of them, stories untold, acts of quiet heroism and pain, written down by a woman who never sought credit. Carefully, he returned them to the box, sealed it, and carried it down the stairs. He found Claire in the chapel, lighting candles before the evening service. She turned at the sound of his footsteps. "Hey," she said, surprised. "I thought you went into town." "I found something," Ethan replied. His voice was low. She noticed the change in his tone and walked toward him. He held out the letter. Claire took it with hesitant hands. As she read, her face went still. When she finished, she didn't speak right away, just folded the letter and held it to her chest. "I didn't think you knew," she said softly. "I didn't want you to." Ethan's voice was raw. "Why not?" "Because I wanted you to see me as I am now, not some child you helped once, not someone who owed you something." He stepped closer. "I never knew. But I'm glad I do now." She looked up at him. "Does it change anything?" "Yes," he said. "It changes everything." There was no romantic gesture, no swelling music, just two people standing in the quiet of an old chapel, realizing that their stories had been intertwined far longer than they ever imagined. Claire placed the letter on the pew. "I came back looking for you once," she admitted, "but you were already gone. So I stayed. I thought, maybe someone else would need me the way I needed you." Ethan exhaled, a slow release of breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. And in that moment, something in him settled. Not finished, but finally beginning. The next few days passed in a strange, delicate rhythm. Ethan continued showing up at St. Agnes each morning, always early, always quiet. He helped organize shelves, fix broken toys, and even planted tulip bulbs with Lily in the garden beds. The children had grown used to him, even fond of him in their own quiet ways. Claire, however, had grown distant, not cold, not rude, just quieter, measured. She no longer lingered in conversations, no longer sat beside him at lunch or walked with him past the chapel. And when he looked at her, truly looked, he saw something he hadn't noticed before restraint. She was building a wall, and Ethan, despite everything he had learned, wasn't sure how to climb over it. One morning, a town car pulled into the driveway of St. Agnes. The driver stepped out and handed Ethan a sleek leather briefcase. "Sir, your lawyer added the documents." The driver said, "They're ready for signing whenever you are." Claire was nearby, helping David tie his shoes. She glanced toward the car, eyes narrowing. Ethan saw it, the moment of recognition, and then the look, not fear, not curiosity, but disappointment. He approached her later, in the staff kitchen. "You saw the car. She was rinsing mugs in the sink. It was hard to miss." "I've been working with a few contacts," he said cautiously, thinking about funding repairs, maybe expanding the dormitory. Claire turned off the tap. Is that what the briefcase was for? Yes, Ethan said. I wanted to surprise you. She faced him. Surprises are fine. Ethan, but this place doesn't need saving. It needs respecting. He stepped back, caught off guard. I wasn't trying to take over. You didn't tell me, she said, voice calm but firm. You brought your lawyers. Your name, your reach, without asking how we do things here. I thought I was helping. No, she said. You thought helping meant control. The words hit hard, not shouted, not cruel, but true. Ethan stared at her. You don't trust me. Claire exhaled slowly. I want to. But men with power always walk in with the same look. You're not the first. They say they care, but in the end, they leave a signature and walk away. I'm not like them. She paused. Then show me. He clenched his jaw. I've built empires with my name. And you think I'm just here to sign and disappear, I think, Claire said gently, that you're not sure why you're here. Not really. And until you are, I need to protect what's already working. He looked at her, stunned by the sudden distance between them. She wasn't attacking him. She was defending something bigger than herself. And he hated how much that made sense. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove back to the inn. He didn't return the next day, or the day after that. He paced his suite, read the letter from Sister Margaret again and again, and replayed every word Claire had said. You thought helping meant control. Was it true he'd arrived hoping to find peace, redemption, maybe, but had he brought with him the same blind need to fix what wasn't broken? On the third day, Lauren called again. We need to finalize the agreement in Singapore. Your silence is putting us at risk. Then let it fall through, Ethan said. There was a long pause. Are you having a breakdown? No, he replied. Maybe for the first time. I'm waking up. That night, Ethan returned to the chapel at St. Agnes. No one saw him. The lights were off. The pews were empty. He sat where he always had, third from the back, right side. The creaky floorboard welcomed him like an old friend. He folded his hands, not in prayer, just in stillness. I don't want to control things, he whispered aloud. I want to belong. The words surprised him, but they were true. He'd spent decades building systems, companies, worlds, but he'd never built roots. Not like Claire, not like the children who ran barefoot through the garden paths, safe in the rhythms of routines and rituals. And now, he wasn't sure if he still had a place among them. The sky over Millbrook had darkened early that day. Storm clouds hung low, thick with unshed rain, casting long shadows across the grounds of St. Agnes. Wind rattled the old shutters as Ethan parked at the edge of the driveway. He wasn't sure what made him come back. Maybe it was guilt, or longing, or something else he hadn't yet named. The main hall was quiet when he stepped in, the usual hum of laughter replaced by the soft sound of rain tapping the windows. Claire was nowhere in sight. He made his way down the hallway, past the art room, when he heard a sharp, muffled sound, a thump, then another, like something striking a wall. He followed the noise and found the door to the supply closet cracked open. Inside was Jacob, the boy who rarely spoke, now huddled on the floor, rocking back and forth. Crayons were scattered everywhere. A paper he had been drawing on lay torn in pieces. Ethan stepped inside cautiously. Jacob, he said softly. The boy flinched, but didn't look up. Hey, it's okay. I'm just here to help. Still no response. Ethan knelt down, careful to leave space. He watched as the boy's small hands gripped his sleeves tightly, trying to breathe through clenched teeth. And then, for a moment, Ethan saw it. Not Jacob, himself. A boy on the edge of control. A boy who didn't have the words, who didn't know how to ask for comfort. He felt his throat tighten, slowly. Ethan sat beside him, mirroring the boy's posture, legs crossed, hands open. They stayed like that for minutes. No words, no movement, just stillness. Then, Jacob shifted, slightly. His shoulder brushed Ethan's, and Ethan felt it an invisible thread. Fragile, but real. I used to hide too, Ethan said gently, when it got too loud, or too quiet, or when the feeling got too big. Jacob's breathing slowed. I didn't know what to call it back then. Ethan continued, but I remember it felt like I was the only one who'd ever felt that way. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old bookmark, the one with the lion and the child. This was mine, he said. I made it when I was about your age. I don't remember doing it, but someone saved it for me, like it meant something. Jacob turned his head, eyes glassy but focused now. Ethan placed the bookmark gently on the floor between them. You don't have to talk, he said. You don't even have to stay. I just want you to know, you're not alone. Jacob stared at the crayon lion for a long time. Then, he picked it up and held it to his chest. And Ethan unexpectedly, uncontrollably, felt tears rising. He turned away, ashamed for a moment, until he felt a small hand press against his arm. Jacob hadn't said a word, but he had seen him. Claire found them like that 10 minutes later. Ethan stood slowly, brushing dust off his coat. Jacob had curled up with the bookmark, asleep now on a blanket Claire must have placed earlier. She looked at Ethan. What happened? He hesitated, then whispered, I met myself 40 years ago. Claire didn't reply. She didn't have to. That night, the storm finally broke. Rain poured over the roof, thunder cracking far in the distance. But inside the chapel, Ethan lit a candle and sat in silence. No expectations, no script, just him, and the echoes of a boy who had waited too long for someone to come back. The following morning, Ethan arrived early, before the sun crept over the hills, before the children stirred in their beds, before even the kitchen lights flickered on. He wasn't carrying a briefcase, no contracts, no suits. Just a warm wool sweater, jeans, and a cup of coffee he'd made himself for the first time in months. He stood by the garden bench, staring out at the dew-covered grass. It glistened in the soft gray light, fragile and alive. Claire found him there just before 7. You beat me in, she said. Surprised, I couldn't sleep. She nodded. Then, after a moment, Jacob's doing better. Ethan looked up. I'm glad. They stood in silence for a while. I'm not here to fix things anymore, he said. I don't want to throw money at memories. I want to earn something here, if there's anything left to earn. Claire studied him, uncertain at first, then softened. We need help fixing the chicken coop. He smiled. That I can do. And so, Ethan stayed, not just in presence but in spirit. He began helping with everything, patching window screens, tutoring Sam in math, cleaning up after painting projects. He drove Lily to her therapy sessions when the regular driver called out sick. He started showing the older boys how to build simple shelves with leftover wood. At first, some of the kids were hesitant. They weren't sure who this tall, quiet man really was. But he didn't try to impress them. He didn't promise anything. He simply showed up, day after day. When Jacob had another episode, Ethan didn't panic. He just sat on the floor again, like before, and waited. The other children began to notice. So did Claire. One afternoon, after a long day of repairs and laughter, Claire brought out 2 iced teas and joined him on the back steps. You're different now, she said, handing him a glass. I feel different. What changed? Ethan took a slow sip before answering. I stopped thinking I had to be the solution and started asking where I fit in. Claire nodded. We never needed a savior, just someone who stayed. He looked at her. Are you saying I'm allowed to stay? She smiled faintly. You're already here, Ethan. The question is, do you want to belong? He looked out across the yard. The swings were still moving gently, empty but alive. I do, he said. For the first time, I really do. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Ethan walked into the main office and placed a sealed envelope on Claire's desk. Inside was a check, a large one, but it didn't have his name in bold. Just 3 words written in simple ink for the roots to grow. Claire found it the next morning and held it to her chest, smiling through tears. He never asked her if she accepted it. He already knew. By the end of the week, Ethan was assigned an official title by the staff facilities assistant. It was part joke, part respect, but he wore it like a badge. No fanfare, no press releases, just dirt under his nails and stories whispered by children in tree forts. It was Claire's idea to host the autumn festival. Nothing extravagant, just hay bales, caramel apples, paper lanterns, and a small fire pit for marshmallows. A way to give the kids something magical before the cold came in earnest. Ethan helped hang the lights, fixed the broken picnic tables, and even carved pumpkins with the older boys. His lion looked more like a lopsided house cat, but no one said a word. By the time dusk settled in, the yard glowed with soft amber lights. Children ran barefoot across the grass, faces sticky with cider and joy. Claire stood to the side, arms crossed, watching everything with quiet pride. "You made this happen," Ethan said, stepping beside her. She shook her head. "We did." He smiled. "I'm still not used to that word. You will be." Then she nodded toward the main table. "Come with me. The kids want to give you something." Ethan hesitated. Claire just took his arm and led him forward. The children had gathered in a semicircle, giggling and whispering. Sam stepped forward, holding something wrapped in brown paper and tied with yarn. "We made this for you," Sam said. Ethan crouched down and opened it slowly. Inside was a hand-painted sign on reclaimed wood with crooked but careful letters. "Welcome home, Mr. Ethan." He looked up, throat tight. I don't know what to say." Claire placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to." Then Jacob stepped forward, still silent, but in his hands was the bookmark, the one Ethan had given him in the closet weeks before. Jacob held it out. Ethan took it, confused. Then Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out another bookmark. It had a new drawing, 2 lions, side by side, and a sun rising behind them. The kids clapped. Claire wiped her eyes discreetly. Ethan couldn't speak, not because he didn't have the words, but because the moment didn't need them. Later that evening, after the festival wound down and the stars began to pierce the sky, Ethan sat alone near the fire pit, poking at the embers. Claire joined him, 2 blankets in hand. She draped one over his shoulders, then sat beside him with the other. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, for the first time in years. They sat like that for a while, watching sparks drift into the night air. Then Ethan spoke, quietly, carefully. "I always thought belonging was something you bought, or proved, or earned. But I was wrong." Claire turned to him. "What is it then?" He looked at her. "It's given freely, but only when you stop asking for it like a transaction and start receiving it like a gift." She smiled. "I'm proud of you," she said, "and not because of what you've done, but because of who you've let yourself become." He nodded, and in the silence that followed, Ethan knew. He wasn't passing through anymore. He wasn't a guest. He was home. Snow came early that year. The trees in Millbrook had barely finished shedding their last leaves before a soft blanket of white settled over the rooftops, covering the garden beds and tracing delicate frost along the chapel windows. Inside, St. Agnes. Warmth thrived. The children had begun rehearsing for their winter pageant paper angels, off-key songs, and glitter everywhere. Ethan helped build the stage this time, not as a guest, not as a donor, as a member of the family. He no longer kept a suitcase at the inn. He had moved into the small staff quarters beside the east wing. Simple bed, wooden shelves, a lamp that hummed when turned on. He didn't mind. Most mornings, he woke to the sound of laughter in the halls or the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Some days, he found crayon drawings slipped under his door. Most featured lions. He kept every single one. One snowy afternoon, he stood with Claire on the back porch, watching Lily teach Jacob how to catch snowflakes on his tongue. Sam was making snow bricks for a fort that never quite stayed upright. "They're getting louder," Ethan noted, smiling. "They're getting safe," Claire replied. She turned to him. "You know, the board officially approved your proposal." He raised an eyebrow. "The one about the community extension." She nodded. "The new wing will provide space for teen programs, family counseling, and a tech room, like you suggested." He looked thoughtful. Think they'll name it after me? Claire grinned. Only if you agree to lead the art classes every Friday. He laughed. Deal. She grew quiet, more serious now. You've given them so much. Ethan, but what surprised me most is what you've let yourself receive. He glanced at her. Does it scare you, he asked, letting someone like me become part of all this? She met his eyes. It used to, but not anymore, because I don't see the man who showed up with a lawyer and a plan anymore. I see the one who stayed up all night when Jacob had the flu, the one who learned every kid's favorite snack, the one who built a birdhouse with his bare hands and cried when it was knocked over. I didn't cry, Ethan said, smiling. You absolutely did, Claire said. They stood like that, sharing a quiet laugh, the wind soft against their coats. Ethan glanced toward the chapel. Do you think? He said slowly. Sister Margaret would have been proud Claire didn't hesitate. She already was, long before you knew it. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Ethan stepped into the chapel alone. He lit a single candle, not for grief, but for gratitude. He stood in the stillness, listening not for voices from the past, but for the heartbeat of the present. He pulled a letter from his coat pocket, not written in Sister Margaret's hand, but his own. To the boy I once was. You were braver than I ever gave you credit for. You survived without the tools. You stayed quiet when the world got too loud. And when you finally spoke, it wasn't with anger, but with care. I see you now. I honor you. And I promise we're home. E.C. He folded the letter and placed it beside the others in the chapel drawer. Then he stepped outside into the quiet snow, where a child's laughter echoed from somewhere down the hall. And Ethan Callahan, once a name etched on office walls and magazine covers, walked back inside a home made not of bricks, but of belonging. Sometimes, the greatest kind of wealth is simply being seen. Ethan Callahan's journey reminds us that no matter how much success the world grants us, the deepest human need is still love, belonging, and the freedom to be ourselves without judgment. But not everyone gets that chance. Too many children grow up feeling invisible. Too many people are written off because of where they came from, how they look, or what they didn't have. Too often, society measures worth in numbers and overlooks the quiet bravery of those who choose kindness over power. This story isn't just about one man or one orphanage. It's a mirror held up to each of us, asking, who do we become when we stop running and start returning? So, if this story touched something in you, if it made you remember someone, or made you feel seen, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this deserve to be told. And maybe someone out there needs to hear the next one. Thank you for being here, and we hope you stay.